Alrighty, welcome back to Shut Up and Ball. I'm Aaron, accompanied by Mr. John Harris, of course. We're here doing our week 2 picks against the spreads today. So let me fill you all in from last week. I know I said on the podcast last week we had 5 differences. We had 6. I cannot count. Anyways, and of course, in usual Shut Up and Ball fashion, had 6 differences, and we split them down the middle. So John and I, both 6-10 after last week. Was a rough week for us, but hey, there were a lot of upsets. It's week 1. But here we're back. Hopefully we can right the ship, and one of us can take the freaking lead here. As of right now, technically John has, as a recording, Chargers covered. Even though they lost by less than 4.5. So John already has one up as we start the week. And yeah, so we're going to dive right into the noon games, or technically the early games first. We're going to start off in the Big Apple, the New York Giants. They're fresh off a huge win. They faced the Carolina Panthers. Panthers off that heartbreaking loss to the Browns previous week. The only notable injury I see is obviously Kayvon Thibodeau. His status is listed as doubtful, so probably not going to play. Same with Azeez Ojulari. He is also listed as doubtful. And then Wan'Dale Robinson is already ruled out for this game. No real notable injuries for the Panthers on their injury report. So, John, who do you have here for this one?
Well, this week is a really interesting week, honestly, because, week 1 happens and there can be a lot of overreactions. And so you're trying to balance that in week 2. And, the Giants, they're coming off a victory against the Tennessee Titans. And I think based on last year's standards, that's a massive W. But we don't really know where everybody stands. And even Carolina, I think they looked a little bit more competitive this year than they did last year. And so both these teams just feel hard to judge because it feels like, at least compared to what they were last season, they both looked better last week. But I'm going to go with Matt Rule and the Panthers here. You can call it bias because I like Matt Rule. I like the Panthers. I'm a Cowboys fan, so I don't like the Giants. But honestly, I think that the Panthers here have a really quick, fast defense. I think they're going to be able to contain Saquon Barkley a little bit better than Tennessee was able to. Also, just overall, I think they're going to be able to get a little bit more pressure onto Daniel Jones. He had pressure last week, but it was about league average in terms of the total pressures they were able to generate, to where with Phil Snow, his defense, I think that they just have so much speed that they can do some more creative things on the defensive side of the ball, especially since Tennessee was missing Harold Landry. Just overall, I like what I saw out of Carolina last week against the Browns, and I don't think the Giants have as strong of an offensive line. I don't think that their defense is going to have as much of an impact as Cleveland's was able to. And I don't know, I just still have some worries about Daniel Jones, his ability to make things happen. I know the Daniel Jones fans are really coming at me the last week or so, as I've stated things like that. But even last week, we saw he had a crucial interception in the red zone. He only threw for about 188 yards. So it was really just the Saquon Barkley show. And if that happens again, I'm probably going to eat my words here. But I'm going with Carolina. I don't know if they win, but if I had to pick, I would take Carolina to win here. And I do think that some players like DJ Moore, Christian McCaffrey, I believe in them to have potentially a bounce back week as well after a pretty slow debut in week 1. So I'm going to go with the Carolina Panthers.
All right. Well, I have a chance to get my game back here. I'm going with the New York Giants. I'm a little bit, call me sipping on like Saquon Gatorade. That's why I am. I mean, I did love him coming out. Obviously, this line I think is better than it has been in previous years. I think we saw a little bit of that already. Some better run concepts in that first game. Although Wan'Dale Robinson being out, I don't think will hurt them as much. They have a deep receiver core. I am worried, of course, because Carolina's defense, like you mentioned, still very good, a very fast defense. Typically, too, especially on the edges and just in the second level. But also on the other flip side, although Cleveland's defense is more talented, I will agree with that in terms of comparison of the Giants' defense. I think the Giants' defense is a little more creative. Cleveland still runs that, Seattle or cover 3 scheme where it's going to be mostly when you line up, where they're kind of going to be in, cover 3, cover 2. Maybe they'll mix up some sort of variation, but nothing crazy or super intricate, while the Giants I think are a little more creative, and I think too they may not get the sacks that that they may not generate the sacks that the Browns did against the Panthers last week, but I still think they're going to be able to stop the run holes. It's going to be probably a tough day on the ground for McCaffrey again. Not a big believer in Ben McAdoo and his offense. I know he said I need to get the ball to Christian McCaffrey more, and I hear that, but he's never been, at least in his history, going back to the Giants and his time in Green Bay, never been the most creative with running back. So I'm just not sure if he's going to find the best ways to get Christian McCaffrey the ball, if that is their plan. And then it was a little concerning, not a lot of DJ Moore week 1, 2, and I know Robbie Anderson's talented, but even then his one big play was kind of on a broken play, kind of got behind the defense and was kind of just lost in coverage. So yeah, I think this is going to be kind of an ugly-ish game probably a lot of field goals, not a lot of just spurts of offense and athletic plays. But I think the Giants are going to tough it out, just being at home. And like I said, off that big win, I don't think they're going to be playoff. I'm not saying they're playoff team, but there could be one of these teams where, they're riding the hot wave early, especially with their first home game coming back off that big win last week against a pretty good Titans team. So, I think they ride the home crown wave and they take this win and cover. Now we move on to a divisional matchup in a division that has no winner. We'll see if it'll be the case again this week. That would be the Indianapolis Colts. They're favored by 3.5 going to Jacksonville for this matchup. In regards to any notable injuries, Alec Pierce ruled out. Shaquille Leonard also ruled out for this game also. And then Michael Pittman's questionable. DeForest Buckner and Kenny Moore, they're all questionable, at least on Friday's report. So who you leaning here, John?
At first, I took Jacksonville, and I changed my pick to the Colts because obviously there's this narrative that, and it's not a narrative. There's the fact that the Colts have not won at Jacksonville since I think it was 2013. So starting in 2014, every single time the Colts have traveled to Jacksonville, they have lost the game. And the Jags were very bad a lot of those years. Some of those years, that was their only win. And I think that for a lot of people, that could be the reason why they're going to take Jacksonville here. But I think if there's any team that is incredibly motivated to win in week 2 right here, it's got to be the Colts. They're coming off a really disappointing tie last week. They're playing against the Texans, and that's a team that I think just pride-wise, as a player, as a coach, all those things, you're not happy about tying with them. And then now you're going to Jacksonville, and all the narrative around you is that stat of having not beaten them in Jacksonville for almost a decade. And so I think that the Colts players are going to come out firing. I think they're going to come out motivated. I think they're going to come out focused. So I'm expecting the Colts to win here. If I'm wrong and history proves me wrong, then I don't know what to say. If that happens again, because it's happened every single year that Frank Reich has been the head coach, I'm not saying to fire him, but there's got to be some serious question marks if he simply just can't beat Jacksonville in Jacksonville.
I haven't been to Jacksonville myself, but not ever heard the best of things. So maybe just the city's a little lackluster, and you're just like, all right, let's get to. It's like a look ahead. A lot of teams do fall. The Colts just fall into the trap of the look ahead game. I don't know, but anyways. In regards to my pick,
just real quick, at least for the look ahead thing, I would hope not, because at least last year that was the win and get in game to the playoffs. So if they were looking ahead to the playoffs and that's why they lost, that is so bad in a win and get in scenario. Anyway,
because they did get the Bills last year too, so it can happen to anyone. I'm going with Jacksonville. I think if anything they'll cover, keep it close. For the most part, they're in the game last week too. It's just kind of ran out of steam and the offense kind of started slowing down. But I like what we saw, a lot of good incorporation of James Robinson and ETN. I expect both to be better and healthier as time goes on because they're still both less than a year removed from major injuries. Like what I saw mostly from the Jaguars defense. I know they let up 4 touchdowns to Carson Wentz, but even on that last touchdown, Aaron Robinson was all over John Dotson. It was just a really good placed ball, and Dotson made the play. And especially with Alec Pierce out, besides Michael Pittman Jr., I like Paris Campbell. We'll see if he can take on the major workload and stay healthy for this game and contribute. Obviously, Jonathan Taylor and offensive line do scare me, but I think the Jaguars can invest enough in stacking the box and making life difficult for the Indianapolis Colts. where I think that I just think their defense is going to be able to slow them down to some degree. I don't think Jonathan Taylor's rushing for 160 yards again, but once again, watch him do that, and I'd be terribly wrong. And then, so yeah, I just think wasn't even Trevor Lawrence's best game last week. So he made a couple mistakes and missed some throws. And once again, I think this is a new system for Jacksonville, and it was still really good. But this is a really good opening week for them. I think they can build off that and at least keep this close. I won't be shocked if the Colts win too. But also, new kicker alert. So who knows? Because they let go Rodrigo Blankenship after last week and brought someone else in. I'm forgetting who, but nonetheless, that's always scary. And you mentioned the whole they haven't won a Jacksonville thing. Maybe I'm buying a little bit of that. It's like, ooh, new kicker too. Is swampy weather. I don't know what the weather's going to be, but it could not be the best weather and such. So I'm going Jacksonville. I think they'll keep this close nonetheless. Wouldn't shock me if they pull out the win, but I don't think they'll lose by more than 3, basically. Third difference thus far, obviously only, I guess, second one. The first one doesn't really count since you already won. Now we keep it in the AFC. We're going over to Cleveland, where the Cleveland Browns are favored by 6.5, hosting the New York Jets. I wouldn't be shocked too if surprised somehow, some way. I would love to see the numbers. This is probably going to be one of the least watched games just because people love to look at the quarterbacks, and it's Joe Flacco and Jacoby Brissett. In terms of notable injuries, obviously Zach Wilson out. Jack Conklin's questionable for the Cleveland Browns this game, and Chris Hubbard, I'm not sure, but he's also a tackle. That could be important. He's already ruled out. And then CJ Uzomah for the Jets, doubtful. And then the Jets tackle George Fant, also questionable as well. So for this potential snooze fest, who do you have here, John?
Well, just based on last week, I know that the Jets lost, and if you just look at the box score, like not even the stats, just the score itself, it doesn't look like they were incredibly competitive, especially since they're only, 3 of their points came in the first 3 quarters, and they scored 6 in the fourth. And so you're like, okay, this was a 24-3 game for most of the outing. But I was really impressed with the Jets defense, and I think that's going to translate here because I think Baltimore is a better offense overall than Cleveland. And I just think that what I saw out of New York was a lot of domination on the defensive side of the ball. I know that they allowed 24 points, but when you actually dive into the stats here, Kenyon Drake, he averaged 2.8 yards per carry. Lamar Jackson, one of the most dynamic runners in the entire NFL, only averaged 2.8 yards per carry. And so on the overall day for the running game, they didn't even get 70 yards on the ground. And so the Jets' run defense stepped up really big time here. Also, they managed to get an interception off Lamar Jackson. And even in terms of like the passing attack, Lamar only had 213 yards. There was no receiver that really gashed them. And even if you like actually go back and watch that game, there was actually very little success through the air outside of like one long pass to Bateman and then one to Duvernay. Like there was really just a few plays that beat the Jets defense here. And I would argue like 90% of the game, they were really in control defensively on that side of the ball. Now, on the offensive side of the ball, they couldn't get a whole lot going, but Baltimore also has an incredibly aggressive style of defense that's going to be hard for any backup quarterback to deal with, especially one that's having to deal with a backup offensive line because Dwayne Brown wasn't playing. Mekhi Becton's already been out. And so I just think that the Jets, what I saw last week, I liked what I saw defensively, and I think that they're going to have success against Cleveland's offense. Like you talked about, Conklin might not play. Chris Hubbard, I'm pretty sure he's a backup, but if Conklin doesn't play, well, now you're already down a potential backup option. I just think that there's some guys who are not going to be playing in this game for Cleveland that could allow the Jets defense to have success. And then obviously Jacoby Brissett's there. Amari Cooper did not have a great start to week 1. It was even David Njoku didn't have a great start. It was just kind of Donovan Peoples-Jones and Nick Chubb. But as I just talked about, the Jets had a really solid defensive performance last week. And so I'm going to go with the Jets to cover. I know that was a very long-winded reason of saying it, but I'm going to take them to cover. 6.5 just feels a little too big for a team that had a really impressive defensive day.
All right, so it looks like we're going to have our first agreements because I'm going with the Jets also. You kind of already alluded to this, but yeah, I just don't think Cleveland's built to have as explosive as Baltimore can be, especially they have Lamar Jackson, like you mentioned, made some big plays with his arm and his legs, mainly his arm though. I just outside of a large Nick Chubb run or Kareem Hunt run, I don't I don't see any other way they're really going to get explosive plays. And then, like you mentioned, too, the Jets defense is a little slept on from their performance last week. I think Cleveland wins this, but obviously I think the Jets keep it close. They do enough. But Cleveland does enough to win this one. Once again, I expect it to be a boring game. Boring. They'll probably make a few plays with Donovan Peoples-Jones and or Amari Cooper. I just don't see them blowing out the Jets, especially by more than 6. And Joe Flacco in the offense, they had some moments. I mean, Michael Carter had a solid game last week. The receivers, Garrett Wilson already got involved off week 1. Elijah Moore kind of had a solid week. So probably another week for Joe Flacco just to be more accustomed to these guys and I guess the system. Also, too, like you mentioned, Cleveland's defense, like I mentioned with the other preview, Cleveland's defense is a little more simplistic. When you line up, they play the Seattle scheme, so it's going to be, they just don't do a lot of disguise coverages or crazy things. Usually when you line up, if the quarterbacks know, okay, this probably cover 3 or cover 2, so there's a little bit less pressure that way or less confusion whenever they drop back. So I'm going Jets. I think they keep this close, but I'm not sure if they win. It's one of those games where I'm kind of glad we have the spread here. Otherwise, and to pick them, I'd probably pick Cleveland, but I wouldn't feel comfortable with it. So that is Cleveland's and the New York Jets. Now we move on to one of the more interesting games of the early slate. That is Tampa Bay Buccaneers. They are favored by 2.5 going to New Orleans. New Orleans is the underdog. So, John, who do you have in this divisional matchup? Oh, sorry. Let me read any injury. Okay, sorry. So, the Donovan Smith tackle, doubtful. Brashad Perryman, questionable. Julio Jones, questionable. Russell Gage, questionable. Those for the Bucs. Paulson Debo listed out for the Saints. And that's really about it in terms of notable guys. Oh, and sorry, Kamara, questionable too.
Yeah. This is another game. I changed quite a few picks this week. I initially picked the Saints, but I'm going to go with Tampa Bay Buccaneers. I think that, a lot of people are going to buy into the Saints record against Tom Brady in Tampa, and I think it's absolutely real, but I still just have some concerns about the Saints this year, and it might be a tad overreaction of week 1, but they didn't impress me like I thought they were going to. Maybe the Falcons are better than we thought. I'm not sure. Maybe the Saints are worse than we thought. Once again, not sure, but I just felt like I learned some things about them that didn't give me a ton of confidence going into this week, specifically against the run game. Like Mariota had a really solid time. Cordell Patterson had a pretty monster week. And we saw last week against Dallas that Tampa was willing to just feed Leonard Fournette and run the ball. And I would argue that this Tampa offense actually looked far more like the Tom Brady offenses that we saw in New England than any of the Tom Brady offenses that we've seen in Tampa. And I think that I'm not saying the offense is completely shifted because the Byron Leftwich is still calling the plays, but Bruce Arians is not there. And so I think that maybe his aggressive approach is no longer there. And this means that we could see just a different type of approach to this game that Tampa has not had during Tom Brady's time there. And so I wouldn't be shocked if this is a low-scoring affair, but I'm going to take Tampa to cover 2.5. I could see Tampa winning by a field goal here. Also, the Paulson Adebo injury worries me. Obviously, Marshawn Lattimore is going to go on Mike Evans, and I wouldn't be shocked if not a lot has changed in that matchup because Mike Evans is not a player that really evolves his game. He's very consistent. He's a stud, but in this specific matchup, he's just consistently lost it. But Julio Jones showed last week that he can be an impact performer. And like I said, I think that relying on Leonard Fournette could be a key to success here. So I'm going to go with Tampa Bay. And this is one that I'm not super confident about because I wouldn't be shocked if New Orleans bounces back and proves me wrong, but sticking with it.
All right. Well, I'm going New Orleans. I guess I'll start on that. Saints defense versus Bucs offense. I think the Saints front sevens, especially in regards to run defense as a whole, I think it's better than Dallas. And then in regards to the secondary, especially the injury to some of these receivers, and also forgot to note too, no Chris Godwin, probably not. With the hamstring injury last week. I mean, you mentioned Mike Evans struggling against his matchup. Okay, so I think that's kind of a stalemate. Then after that, I'm just not sure. Yes, Julio Jones had a good week last week, but I'm not sure if he can do it again. I would like to see him do it again. So once it's kind of like a prove me wrong type situation here for me. Maybe Russell Gage can contribute, but I just think that the Saints, there's a reason they give the Bucs and Brady a lot of issues because they could stop their run game pretty much with their front four, and then they can also get home with their front four as well a lot often, and then they can do creative stuff on the back end. They often do that. And then on the other side of the ball, Saints offense, Bucs defense. Well, the Bucs defense is very good. I mean, I think last week, Saints kind of got off to a slow start. I feel like the second half they really kind of let Jameis be, kind of took the reins off him a little bit, let him throw the ball a little more. Obviously, him and Michael Thomas kind of started finding their way and their connection, and Jarvis Landry had a very quietly good game as well. I just think the fact that they have all the receivers healthy, and I think Jameis will make some plays, but that does scare me. The Jameis factor scares me because he could make a play for the Bucs and not for the Saints very easily. But nonetheless, like two very similarly built teams, but I just feel like the Saints are just better built to slow down the Bucs, especially with their issues on the interior offensive line. And while the Saints probably missing Kamara and or Mark Ingram, I expect we'll see some crazy, some creative Taysom Hill usage or just other backs usage. And then I think as long as the three receivers are there, they can stress out that secondary and find ways to move the ball. But I think it'll be an interesting game, but I actually think that the Saints will win, but I'm glad I'm getting 2 points as well because I'm with you. I think it could come down to a last minute field goal. Just hopefully the Saints are up by 1 or something if that happens for me. So another disagreement for us right there in the, why am I forgetting the division? Is the NFC South, right? Yeah, NFC South. So now we move on back to the AFC. We're going up to Baltimore, where the Baltimore Ravens, fresh off their win, they're at home. They are favored by 3.5. They're hosting the Miami Dolphins, also fresh off a win. I think if I remember correctly, last year Dolphins got the better of Baltimore, but nonetheless, John, let me see if there are any major injuries. Let's see, Taron Armstead questionable, Cedric Wilson questionable. Then for the Ravens, James Prochet, wide receiver, doubtful. J.K. Dobbins, questionable. Ronnie Staley is also doubtful as well. And they did lose Juwan James last week, their other tackle. He's out. Who do you have here for this AFC matchup, John?
I'm going to go with the Baltimore Ravens. Honestly, the big reason for me is, yes, I was impressed with what Miami did last week. They proved me wrong. I took New England, but I have concerns about their offensive line still. It wasn't as impressive as I think a lot of people were sort of hyping them up to be. They weren't terrible, but I mean, like Connor Williams had a good game. But there was just still some times where I just felt like there was a lot of pressure that was going to his way. And the offense outside of like the crazy plays from Waddle and Tyreek Hill didn't really wow me. It was sort of what I expected it to be, which is, hey, we're going to have to dink and dunk and we're going to throw these slants and throw a little contested catch. And Tua's going to do that and it's going to work. And I think that that's what happened in this game. But I think that they were also bolstered by the fact that the Patriots offense couldn't really move the ball. I'm more confident in Baltimore's offense's ability to move the ball. And I think that it's just going to be a far different challenge than what we saw out of the Patriots in week 1. So I'm going to go with Baltimore here.
I'm going with the Dolphins. I think maybe kind of threading the needle here. But I think if anything, they'll keep it close. It wouldn't shock me if they win. Potentially having both tackles out is concerning for me for Baltimore. Already had issues running the ball last week. May not even, and then even if they do get J.K. Dobbins back, I don't think it's going to be a 100% J.K. Dobbins. I think we all already have concerns about their pass game, although they did make some plays with Devin Duvernay last week. Rashad Bateman a little bit too, but we can argue that Miami's defense, especially their secondary, is better right now than New England's is. I think their defense as a whole is probably better. We can all agree that. So I worry that they're going to find ways to contain Lamar just like they did last year and just make life really hard on the Ravens offense. And on the flip side, I am still concerned about Miami's offensive line. Right there with you, but especially Marcus Peters and Marlon Humphrey questionable for this game, and they probably, even if they do play, they probably won't be 100%, especially with all these wide receivers. I just think that Miami will find ways to move the ball methodically, and it's probably going to be a field goal type game. And I know it's crazy to say when the other team has Justin Tucker, but I just think in terms of the offense, I think Miami will find more rhythm and flow, just be able to move the ball a little bit better than Baltimore. And I wouldn't be shocked if the Miami defense creates an extra turnover or two, while for their offense. Tua, I think, will be a little more careful with the ball. That's already his style of play, is to kind of just manage the game, make a few throws here and there, and just kind of I don't say protect their lead, but just be a little conservative since they have a really good defense and really good skill position players. So don't need to take that many chances. So I am going with Miami. John's going with Baltimore. We'll see what happens there. But speaking of New England, Miami's foes, that's the next game we're going to. The Patriots are favored by 2.5 going to Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh Steelers are the underdogs. Any notable injuries? I know Mac Jones got off the injury reports. Ty Montgomery obviously not there. He's on the IR. Trent Brown questionable. And then obviously for Pittsburgh, missing TJ Watt. Big deal there. So John, who do you have for this one?
I'm going with New England. I know that this is already baked into the spread, but the TJ Watt injury really worries me here about their ability to get pressure on the edge. I know that Cam Hayward is going to, be a force in this game, but I just still worry about Pittsburgh's defense without the catalyst of everything. I mean, even like guys like Minkah Fitzpatrick, who's an absolute ball hawk, he can thrive off of he can read when his defensive line with TJ Watt is getting a lot of pressure. He can see when the quarterback is panicking, and he can make plays off of that. Without TJ Watt there, you're going to have to cover longer because there's not going to be as much pressure going on to Mac Jones. I think the Patriots are going to bounce back a little bit after last week. Their offensive performance was absolutely pitiful, and I don't expect that to be that bad throughout the year, although I don't think it's going to be great because of the play callers. They still have talent, and I expect that talent to show up in this game, especially considering that Pittsburgh's best player is not playing in this game. Also, another big thing, Pittsburgh's offense was really lackluster last week. I know that Najee Harris is scheduled to play and is not going to be on the injury report, but I still worry about how much of the game he's going to play. I wouldn't be shocked if they just play this safe and they try to limit his usage, especially on like some important downs, like maybe a third down or something like that, so that he can fully recover. And so I worry about his impact, but overall, just the offense, their offensive line is terrible. We saw that last week. The Bengals were able to get a lot of pressure on Trubisky, and despite the fact that the defense caused 5 turnovers, they narrowly won because of a blocked extra point and then win the game in overtime. So I just, once again, it was just sort of freak circumstance that happened last week, and I don't think they're going to be able to force 5 turnovers against New England. And the fact that their offense wasn't able to capitalize that much on it without those turnovers, especially since TJ Watt is not playing, I just have concerns about Pittsburgh as a whole. So I'm going to go with the Patriots.
I'm going with the New England as well, the Patriots also. You already mentioned the point, no TJ Watt. I think that's huge. Their defense was probably the main reason they won last game, and now they're going to be missing a major component of it, like you mentioned. And two, like you said, I think New England's offense is a little bit better than most people are giving credit for last week. They were right there in the red zone Mac Jones had that interception that bounced kind of up, and the Miami Dolphins grabbed it. I think they'll be a little more careful with the ball there. And then, but for the most part, I just have no faith in the Pittsburgh offense. Like you mentioned, they couldn't really run the ball outside of a few Claypool sweeps that really got the ball moving a bit. Yeah, Mitch Trubisky was able to make a few plays off schedule, but those are just things that you really can't depend on day in and day out, especially from a Mitchell Trubisky. And I just think New England's going to capitalize on that, probably play a little bit smarter than the Bengals did. Bengals are, they're a more aggressive team, so they're going to keep kind of playing into Pittsburgh's hands. But I just think that Mac Jones will be able to move the ball a little bit more, definitely turn the ball over less, which means less easier opportunities for Pittsburgh to get an easy field goal. That's basically what happened, because Pittsburgh couldn't really convert most of those opportunities unless Minka really ran it back himself. So yeah, I don't think anything else needs to be added there. It does scare me. It is in Pittsburgh, and also I do have this weird Pittsburgh curse, a lot going back to last year, where I kept picking them against them towards the end of the year, and they kept freaking trucking along. And then obviously week 1, I thought the Bengals would take care of business, and that didn't happen. So we'll see if I can break that curse. But otherwise, me and John in agreement here, both going New England to cover that spread at Pittsburgh. I was about to say Heinz Field, no longer Heinz Field, unfortunately, because they took off the ketchup bottles. So anyways, going to the last game of the early slate, we're going to Detroit, where the Lions are favored by 1.5, hosting the Washington football team. Oddly enough, they're favored, I guess maybe because they're home. Anyways, obviously for the Commanders, Brian Robinson out. No one else really of note there. And then for the Lions, a big one is going to be Frank Ragnow. He is already listed as out, their center. DeAndre Swift is questionable, but I know he mentioned sometime during the week, even though he hasn't practiced, that he'll be fine. So, yeah, John, who do you have here for this one?
I'm going with Detroit here. I don't feel super confident about it, and I think that's probably why the line is so close, 1.5. This is the closest game, the closest spread of the whole week. I'm going with Detroit. I think that Washington's defense is not going to be as good as Philly's was last week, and we saw that Detroit was able to have success against Philly. So I think that Detroit's going to be able to have some success offensively. Amon St. Brown, DeAndre Swift, some of their key playmakers got involved. I think DJ Chark could have a big performance here. He's a deep threat. I worry about Washington's ability to cover receivers deep. I mean, we saw last week Christian Kirk was able to have a pretty solid performance. ETN had some big plays. Overall, I just think that Washington's defense was giving up a lot of explosive plays against an offense that has a lot of playmakers that can make them. So I'm going to go with Detroit to win here. I think it could be a bit of a shootout because I do worry about Detroit's secondary. I think that Jahan Dotson, Curtis Samuel, Terry McLaurin, all those guys can have a really big week because the Lions last week, I think their cornerback room was the lowest graded in the entire NFL. Now, obviously, that's 1 week, but you're playing Jalen Hurts, who's not some surgical passer. And although Carson Wentz is also not some surgical passer, he's a better thrower of the football than Jalen Hurts. So I think that they could have success on that side. But like I said, I'm taking Detroit to win in a shootout.
Another disagreement. I am going with Washington here. I think Washington offense, like you mentioned, versus Detroit defense, I think that secondary can be had. We saw it last week that aside from a few Carson Wentz turnovers, which does scare me, it should scare anybody on the Washington side. I think that they'll be able to overcome that and just be able to move the ball pretty much through the air at will. On the flip side, I just think that Washington's a little more talented team, especially even the secondary. Still have William Jackson. I'm assuming he'll probably be on Chark/Winter St. Brown. And at the end of the day, I mean, last week Jared Goff had that unfortunate/terrible pick six that kind of killed the momentum because then all of a sudden they were down double-digit scores. And at the end of the day, and it's funny because I think this is kind of a low-key story. These two guys, top of their draft, and here they are with completely different teams again. It's like, who do you trust more? And right now I just trust Carson Wentz a little bit more, just because I think he's just the better upside, and I think as of right now, just the better team around him, especially at skill position spots. So, yeah, it's one that would have been interesting years ago if they were with the original teams. Obviously now these two quarterbacks, on a different path. But yeah, I'm going with Washington. I think that they'll win, and obviously at 1.5, that's basically what we're picking here. And yeah, I was surprised to see them as the underdog, but maybe the bettors know something we don't. I mean, heck, I didn't even go above 500 last week, so I probably don't know what I'm doing. But anyways, that is the early slate of games. Now we move on to the later games, starting with the LA Rams. They're at home. They're favored by 10.5 against the Atlanta Falcons. Obviously hoping to bounce back from what happened last Thursday night. In regards to who was out, for the Falcons, Deion Jones, their linebacker, he's on the IR, so he will not be in this game. For the Rams, Joe Noteboom, their tackle, questionable. Leonard Floyd, their edge rusher linebacker, he is questionable. Van Jefferson, one of their wide receivers, he is already ruled out for this game. So, John, who do you got here for this one?
Another tough game, but I'm going Atlanta. The Rams, they just have some issues along the offensive line that I'm still concerned about. Also, Atlanta last week, they just looked a lot better than I expected. Once again, I talked about that when we were talking about the Saints. I did not expect Atlanta to come out and put up that much of a fight, and they did. And so maybe it's just because of what we saw last week. There could be a hard overcorrection, but I was not impressed with the Rams. I was impressed with Atlanta. I think that Matthew Stafford's injury is probably still affecting him, like we talked about in our recap. I was not impressed with some of the throws that he made that I think normally he has on the money. So I still think that a guy like Cooper Kupp is going to have a massive impact, but outside of that, I think that A.J. Terrell could have some success against Allen Robinson on the outside. So I'm going to take Atlanta to cover. I'm not saying they're going to win. I still think the Rams will, but I'm taking them to cover.
Yeah, I think the Rams will win this one, but I'm with you. I'm taking Atlanta to at least keep it close. Heck, maybe they'll shock the world and win this one. But yeah, you already hit shaky offensive line for the Rams. That's the main point. I mean, if they can't get the run game going, it's just going to be easier. AJ Terrell is going to be on Cooper Kupp or Allen Robinson, and maybe they shade some more direct attention towards the other guy, whoever AJ isn't on. And Cam Akers, it was weird and concerning that he didn't get many touches. He was in the doghouse, and I wouldn't be shocked if he's still kind of in the doghouse. I don't think they're just going to give the full reins to him anyway on offense. And like we already mentioned, poor offensive line also. So maybe that's also why Sean McVay's not trying to, give him a lot of volume. Same with Darrell Henderson. And then on the flip side, especially if Leonard Floyd's going to be out or, not 100%, outside of Aaron Donald, who we all know is great and amazing, I just don't know who else is going to generate pressure for the Rams. It will be interesting, though. Raheem Mostert, a little bit of revenge game here too, because he was their interim head coach at least for a hot minute, and they decided not to keep him. We saw Mariota in the offense move the ball a bit at times. They had pretty good numbers rushing, but I think stylistically, I just think the Rams may match up a little better in the run game as opposed to the Saints. Saints are more of a bigger front seven, more physical, and I think the Falcons just got them by surprise, but use their speed was just the outlier there, while the Rams much more built on speed, running even at the linebacker positions. So I think they won't be gashed as much as these Saints were last week. And then also, no real receivers to scare you. Although Ramsey did not have a good week last week, I expect he'll be fine against Drake London and or Kyle Pitts, depending on how they utilize him. I think Atlanta keeps it close. Like John mentioned, if I had to pick who would win, I think it'd be the Rams. But hey, maybe Atlanta will shock the world, like I mentioned. That is that one. We're both in agreement with the Falcons there. Now we move on to San Francisco, where the 49ers are at home. They are favored by 8.5, hosting the Seattle Seahawks. San Francisco coming off that rainy game. Seahawks coming off that crazy Monday night win. Obviously, for the 49ers, running back Elijah Mitchell on IR. One of their tackles or linemen, Brunskill, already out. George Kittle's could be questionable with that groin injury. Wouldn't be shocked if he is not very effective if he does play, because I'm a quote-unquote groin injury expert. And then Jamal Adams on IR for the Seahawks. And, that's about it. Anyways, though, who do you have for this NFC West showdown, John?
I'm going to keep it simple. I'm going with Seattle here. I just think the spread is a little bit too big for me to be confident in Trey Lance. I know it's at home. I know they're not dealing with a monsoon. I know that I literally just put the video out a couple days ago that says not to panic about Trey Lance, and I stand by that take. But Seattle impressed me last week. I think that Geno Smith played a really strong, efficient game. I think he was able to deal with pressure, and I think they were able to just find ways to move the ball when they needed to most. And I think that they can have that same efficiency here. And at the same time, I think that Trey Lance, although it's a weak Seattle defense, I know that they did win and they held the Broncos to a low score. But once again, they fumbled twice on the goal line. If that doesn't happen, it's looking like a blowout. Although it's a weak Seattle defense, I still think that Trey Lance has some learning, some maturing to do. So I'm going to go Seattle here. Also, just random side note, wasn't super impressed with San Francisco's offensive line last week, especially the right side. I think that Seattle, although they don't have the greatest of pass rush, they can still get some pressure onto Trey Lance. So I'm going to go with Seattle to cover. Do not think they're going to win, but I think they'll cover.
Yeah, I'm mostly in agreement with you in regards to I think Seattle will cover. Probably not win, but wouldn't shock me. I think we saw, Geno Smith. I think we saw why he's one of the better backups / probably one of the better low end starters. He for last game took care of the ball for the most part, made a few plays with his legs. Obviously, this will be a much tougher defense to do that against. But like you mentioned on the flip side, the 49ers offense never really got into a flow, and that's not really a shot at Kyle Shanahan. I just think, like you mentioned, it was Trey Lance. He would miss some reads and then would miss some slam dunk throws. Especially with Elijah Mitchell out. We'll see what happens in the run game. Obviously, Jeff Wilson's solid. But like you mentioned, I think Seattle's run defense can be solid as well, especially if they've been able to, for the most part, especially in recent years, been able to get a hold of that San Francisco running scheme. So, yeah, I think Seattle will be riding that high from Monday night a little bit, especially like in the first half, maybe jump out to a tie or like a slight lead, and then San Francisco just wears them down as time goes on. Be interested to see if George Kittle plays, because I think Kittle could be, depending on what his health is, could be the ultimate equalizer for the 49ers. Nonetheless, I think that they'll find a way, the 49ers, to win this game. It will be a close one. It's this division. Usually these games are all pretty close, especially in the NFC West. So, yeah, I'm going with Seattle here to at least cover. And, yeah, if San Francisco, blows up on offense and such, that's fine. I'll live with that. It's one of those things where I got to see it to believe it. I got to see Trey Lance put together 4 full great quarters before I can believe that they can cover an 8.5 point spread. But hey, maybe the defense will do them favors. Who knows? But I'll put my money on the ladder or the other side for now. So that is San Francisco and Seattle. Now we move on back to the AFC, to the team that Seattle played on Monday. That is the Denver Broncos. They are at Mile High, favored by 10.5, hosting the Houston Texans. Injuries: Texans center Justin Britt's out, and then for the Broncos, when their guards, Quinton Miners is out. KJ Hamler, one of their wide receivers, is also ruled out. Billy Turner, guard, questionable, and Randy Gregory, edge rusher, also questionable. So, John, do you think that Denver can bounce back from Monday?
I think they can bounce back. I think they're going to win. I'm taking Houston to cover here. I think that the offense that they had last week, I liked what I saw. I think that Brandon Cooks is a solid receiver. Davis Mills does a good job taking care of the ball. Rex Burkhead had some pretty solid performances, and their offensive line is very strong, especially on the tackle spots. And so I think that they can counter what Denver's going to want to do defensively. I think that they're going to play a very slow style of offense and not really ramp up the pace of play because they're going to want to keep this game lower scoring. But yeah, I'm going to take Houston here. The 10.5 just feels a little bit too big for me, considering that Denver is coming off of a loss against a team that I expected them to beat, far more than 10.5. Once again, could just be me overreacting to week 1, but I'm going to go with Houston, not to pull off the upset, but to cover.
Alrighty. Well, I am going with Denver. I think, especially after what happened Monday, I just think this is a huge opportunity for a bounce back game. I think the offense, probably maybe a little more patient with the run and find other ways just for more explosive plays. And we'll be dealing with people, there's a lot of criticism about their offense, wasn't getting plays in on time, looked confused at time at the line of scrimmage. I think we have to mostly credit that to the Seattle home crowd. It is a real thing that affects you, and especially since it'd be at Denver, crowd will be on their side. Definitely, I think the offense will run more smoothly, get on track, and be the offense I think we all expected it to be. And on the flip side for Houston, it does scare me in terms of the Broncos defense. Justin Simmons probably going to be out for this game. He's on injury reserve. Sorry, so I should have mentioned that for the pregame thing. But I don't know why. I blame ESPN for injury report. They missed that one. But no Justin Simmons for this game. That does scare me. Brandon Cooks, deep threat. I just don't think that Davis Mills is, I think we saw last week, is consistent enough. Like, he had a really good first half, and then they kind of cooled down. And I just don't think they're going to catch Denver by surprise, as they did the Colts last week, who we had our criticisms of, and they were missing a key defender in Shaquille Leonard. I just think Bradley Chubb might have some impact here. Obviously, Pat Surtain's pretty good. He'll probably be on Brandon Cooks. And after Brandon Cooks, I just don't know who really scares you in that offense. And it seems like, too, they're leaning on Rex Burkhead more than my guy Dameon Pierce. And even regardless, Burkhead's more of a pass-catching back anyway. And I just don't see Houston gashing them, even with Dameon Pierce or either one of them. So I think Denver kind of makes a statement game. They cover this 10.5. It does scare me, though. It's the NFL. 10's a lot. And could be a 17-point game, and Houston scores a garbage time touchdown. So, and before, this is like one of our Monday or Tuesday posts, me being wrong about this, but I'll take it I'll take that if it happens. So, another disagreement for the both of us there. Now we go on to Cincinnati, where the Bengals, they are favored by 7.5, going to John's Dallas Cowboys minus Dak Prescott. Obviously, at Jerry's World. In regards to any injuries, obviously Dak Prescott out for this game. Michael Gallup already ruled out, and guard Connor McGovern ruled out. If there's anyone else I missed, you can let me know when I throw it to you. T. Higgins questionable with his concussion, and that's the only other notable, at least according to ESPN, injury. So, John, how you feeling about your Cowboys this week?
Did you say Jaron Curse? Sorry, I was kind of phased out a little bit there.
I did not. So thanks, ESPN.
Jaron Curse, yeah. Safety, very important too. He just got paid in this offseason. Initially, I was going to take Dallas because I was like, you know what, 7.5 feels big. And then I sat there and that was under the assumption that I was like, I think they're going to run the ball a lot and keep this low scoring and blah, blah, blah. And then I was just sitting there like, man, I don't trust Kellen Moore to do that. I think the path to success in this game for Dallas with Cooper Rush is you're going to have to run the ball and you're going to have to keep it low scoring. And as I said last week, I believe in the defense. I truly do. I truly believe that this defense against most offenses can hold the opposing offense to under 24 points like a majority of the season because I think this defense is very good. But in this game with a backup quarterback, I don't think that the Kellen Moore is going to be patient with the run. And we saw that last week. You're playing against Tampa, who is historically known as one of the best run defenses, and yet Zeke is averaging 5.2 yards per carry, and you only gave him 10 carries. I think that once again in this game, they would have to run the ball. They'd have to do it all game. And we've seen in the past, even last year, they won a primetime game with Cooper Rush at quarterback. So I'm not ruling the possibility out for any of the games that he's starting. But at least what I saw last week, I just don't believe in the coaching staff enough to overcome what I expect to be a bounce back performance from Joe Burrow, Jamar Chase, that whole team. I mean, Jamar Chase doesn't need to bounce back. Like, he was a baller. But Joe Burrow, I mean, he turned the ball over 5 times, and that's not something that is characteristic of Joe Burrow at all. I mean, he has like that one game a year in which he has a lot of turnovers, but it's still a pretty rare sight. He is usually incredibly accurate. He completes a lot of passes, and I think that that's going to be one of those games where he knows that the other side of the ball, the offense on the other side, just like last week, is probably not going to be able to score a ton. And so I think that he's going to be surgical. He's going to be calm. He's going to be collected. He's going to trust his team. He's going to trust his defense, not try to fit everything in there and throw a lot of interceptions. And so I am taking the Bengals to cover. It depresses me that I have to say that because I really think that if Dak was playing this game, they could have a shot to win this. I don't know. I'm pretty sure Dallas was actually favored in this game before the season started. So obviously that was with healthy Dak, healthy Jaron Curse, probably healthy Tyron Smith. And so it just sucks that the injuries are happening, but it is what it is. That's football. You got to deal with it. And the Bengals, like I said, after last week, I think they're going to correct quite a few things.
Right with you. And I think especially because it's looking like, who knows though, concussions are random, looking like T. Higgins is on track to play in this game. I think that was something that they missed last week, just the extra, wide receiver that you have to worry about, the extra weapon. And regardless, even if he's not available, I think Tyler Boyd and Hayden Hurst will be more ready to assume, more responsibility. I think Dallas showed last week, obviously, I think the Bucs' offensive line is a little bit bigger in size in terms of the Bengals' offensive line. But I think the Bengals will probably see that how much success the Bucs had running the ball. Probably do something like that, like you mentioned, kind of slow the pace down, be a little more methodical and careful, and then, take their shots with T. Higgins and Jamar Chase and Tyler Boyd. And then, on the flip side, it's Cooper Rush. I know he won a game last year, but I think the Bengals, especially with just really CeeDee Lamb, the only wide receiver that kind of scares you, expect him to get a lot of attention. Dalton Schultz didn't really get to do much last week, and I won't be shocked if it's the same this week as well. I think we're starting to see the huge effect that an absence of Dak Prescott is leaving, on top of the fact that the coaching isn't really great in terms of like you mentioned on the offensive side of the ball. So when they throw the backup in, I'm just not as confident of Dallas' offense being consistent and getting explosive plays that you're going to need against a team like the Bengals, who we all know they're going to get their explosive plays with all the playmakers they have, and obviously Joe Burrow at quarterback. So I'm with you. I think Cincinnati covers. Like we mentioned, they got to bounce back after last week, and I suspect that they will. This is a prime opportunity to do so. So we'll see if they drop the ball or not. But now, speaking of dropping the ball, we go to two teams that also lost last week and aren't looking so good now. That is the Las Vegas Raiders. They are at Las Vegas, favored by 5.5, hosting the Arizona Cardinals. Obviously, Raiders lost a close game to the Chargers. Cardinals got blown out by the Chiefs. In regards to the Cardinals, obviously no D-Hop, he's suspended. J.J. Watt, questionable for this game. Same with Trayvon Mullen. And then also Rondale Moore and Andy Isabella, both some of their wide receivers are out. For the Raiders, center Andre James listed as out. Safety Trayvon Morig out. Denzel Perryman also listed as out, and Brandon Bolden listed as doubtful, one of their running backs. So John, we both have friends, mutual friends on either side of this camp. So who are you going with for this week?
The tough part for me about this game is that Arizona looked so bad last week, and I just can't bet on them to fix it because I don't think they have the defensive talent. I mean, I mentioned this earlier when we did our reviews earlier in the week, but like Dallas, they lost some key pieces, and it was pretty obvious what their weaknesses were going into the season. And then obviously in the first game, those weaknesses are on full display. Same thing with the Cowboys. That's what happened to the Cardinals defense. And so I'm just worried that Devontae Adams, Hunter Renfrow, Darren Waller, Derek Carr, those guys are going to have a field day. Patrick Mahomes in that offense ate them alive in the game last week. And I think that the Raiders are going to be able to do it too. Also, first home game, that stadium's going to be booming. I'm just not betting on the Cardinals here, especially considering that Rondale Moore, D-Hop, they still are missing some weapons.
Yeah, I think Arizona's offense is concerning. Once again, I think it's at that point where it's kind of stagnant. Can't really run the ball. Their offensive line isn't great at doing that. And Cliff Kingsbury's scheme isn't really run dependent anyways. And then that leads to play action there's not going to be effective, or they really don't run much. I wouldn't be shocked if the numbers say that. So once again, another way to get explosive plays out the window. And I mean, once again, you mentioned the receivers. Only Marquise Hollywood-Brown really scares you, but I think we saw last week, he didn't really scare. He wasn't even their leading receiver. I think it was Dortch was their best receiver. So, even though Las Vegas Raiders criticized their defense, I think they showed last week they were able to adjust. They slowed down a very good Chargers offense as well. And I think we all feel the Chargers offense is better than Arizona's offense. So therefore, I think they'll be fine handling this Arizona offense. And on the flip side, I mean, really, the Raiders offense was looking pretty good last week. It was just, the turnovers mainly by Derek Carr, and obviously, some sacks given up. Arizona's defensive line not as good as the Chargers defensive line right now. We saw that last week. Chiefs did whatever they wanted. Obviously, Derek Carr is no Mahomes, but I think he'll still be able to make plays. And we obviously saw Darren Waller and Devontae Adams in this offense. It all worked out just fine. Josh Jacobs had a solid game running the ball. I wouldn't be shocked if he has another solid one. And I also wouldn't be shocked if they incorporate a little more Hunter Renfrow as well, because he wasn't really a part of the game plan also. But it is the bind that they put you in, because I feel like Arizona, they might have to double, and also they might have to blitz, and because of their pass rush, their front four isn't already great. We know they're a blitz-heavy team already, but against Devontae Adams and Darren Waller and Hunter Renfrow, I imagine one of those guys will get open if they're put on one-on-ones. And we know Josh McDaniels' offense is very good at finding ways to get their guys open. Especially, he'll probably have some answers for Vance Joseph's blitzes anyway. So yeah, long story short, I'm with you, John. I'm going Las Vegas. Sorry, Kyle Wells, our boy. He probably knows it too. I think we're starting to see the end of the Cliff Kingsbury era here, unless they can make some changes quick and fast. I mean, they even mentioned they had poor practice habits. Like, that's something you shouldn't be saying after week one. You've had literally months to practice and prepare. And I don't know. That's not a good look.
I mean, listen, this is the coach who allows cell phone breaks at practice. So I don't know.
And we're I don't think millennials, but we're pretty young guys. Like, we're pretty progressive in that. And I don't know about the phone. Anyways, so nonetheless, we're both going Vegas here. They handle their business. So now we move to the Sunday night game. That is the Chicago Bears and the Green Bay Packers. Green Bay Packers are at home. They're favored by 10.5, hosting the Bears. For the Bears, Alex Leatherwood, the tackle they picked up from the Raiders, he is out. And then the rookie wide receiver, Velus Jones Jr., he is listed as doubtful, so probably won't play. For my Packers, Alan Lazard, questionable. Bakhtiari, our left tackle, questionable. And Elton Jenkins, guard, center / tackle, questionable as well. As a Packer fan, I'm not even sure. Like, questionable truly is 50-50 for those tackles. I feel like Lazard will play. But nonetheless, John, how are you feeling about this one?
I don't feel confident in Chicago here. I know the spread's really big, but I'm going to take Green Bay. I think they bounce back after last week. They're at home, and I just don't think that offensively, especially on that offensive line, Chicago's going to have really anything to deal with Green Bay's defense. They don't have a Justin Jefferson that can thrash that defense like we saw last week. So I'm going to take Green Bay. I think Aaron Rodgers is going to bounce back. I don't think that Christian Watson's going to drop a 75-yard touchdown on the first play. I think that Aaron Jones and A.J. Dillon can just destroy that defense. So I'm going to take the Packers to cover because I do think that Chicago has overexceeded their expectations already early in the season. I think they'll come back down to earth.
Yeah, I think for the most part, the weather kind of played into their hands last week. Like as soon as they got the lead, it rained even harder, and just it was tough for San Francisco to do anything in terms of the pass game or run game. It was. We all saw like they were just slipping. Like if Justin Fields can just pop a slide like that easily and all that water. I mean, I didn't watch the game live, but when I rewatched it again, saw some of the things of them like literally getting squeegees out. Like I don't know, that game, no pun intended, was kind of a wash. Like there's not much to take from that. I'm not sure about if this Green Bay offense can be explosive enough. It just didn't seem like Rodgers has the trust in his wide receivers. I mean, he threw the ball a lot to running backs last week, so I feel like it's just going to be a death by 1,000 paper cuts. And then on the flip side, though, I do like the Packers' defense against the Bears' offense. I just don't see really who can scare us outside of Justin Fields himself, but he is only one man, and I think we can handle Darnell Mooney. And really, I don't think there's any other receiver that really scares us. Don't think the Bears' run game can really start gashing the Packers. So ultimately, though, because I think we played last year, I remember the Bears kind of had found some traction late in the game. I don't think Packers are going to cover. I think my Packers win. I just don't think we're the type of offense yet that can be explosive like we were in years past, where this would be an obvious bounce back game. Aaron Rodgers is going to throw 3 or 4 touchdowns. I just don't think we have the skilled receivers to do that, and Rodgers doesn't have the chemistry with them yet. And especially if the tackles don't play, one or two of them, the offensive line could be an issue as well. Because also, I think one of our interior linemen dealing with a concussion too, so he's questionable. Once again, thanks ESPN for listening him. So that's what scares me. And also, I am maybe going for a little bit of reverse jinx for my Packers. So that's the Sunday night game. Another difference there for me and John. I'll have to tally them up after this. We got quite a few. But now we go to one of the Monday night games. There's 2 this week, if you don't know. The first one being the Buffalo Bills at Buffalo, fresh off that big win against the LA Rams. They're favored by 10.5, hosting the Tennessee Titans. This has been kind of a low-key rivalry the past few years, mainly to the Titans side, surprisingly. Obviously, I'm guessing the 10.5 is a little bit indicative of the Bills' great performance last week and the Titans getting upset. John, what are your thoughts on this one?
I have worries about Tennessee. I worry about Derrick Henry. I think that he's still going to be great this year, but there's going to be a little bit of a decline that we're going to see compared to what our previous expectations have been, just because of age, because of the workload, because of the previous injury, the declining offensive line around him. I just think that even the whole offense around him getting worse with A.J. Brown leaving, I just have some issues. Also wasn't super impressed with Tennessee's receivers last week. None of them really popped. And so overall, I'm going Buffalo here. They were just too dominant in the week prior against the Rams, and I'm just not sure where Tennessee's points are going to come from, and I'm not sure I don't know if their defense can step up. I mean, Jeffrey Simmons had a great game last week, but as we talked about in our review, the Titans secondary was absolutely pitiful against the Giants. They just had such terrible grades in terms of coverage. A lot of them gave up a majority of the catches that were targeted towards them. And so I think that Buffalo, Josh Allen, they're going to continue to roll, continue to prove why they're the Super Bowl favorites. Taking Buffalo to cover.
I'm taking the Titans to just cover. I think Buffalo does win this game, but Titans have given them issues in the past, mainly that man Derrick Henry. He's had a lot of success against Buffalo. I think the Titans might be able to take advantage of that smaller, more speed-dependent defensive line of the Buffalo Bills. Play a little defense with their offense like they typically do, keep the ball out of Josh Allen's hands. And then when Josh does have the ball, they throw a lot of creative zones and just general pass concepts or pass defense concepts against him, especially since I think that they will call Buffalo's bluff. probably just do that. Probably set a lot of 8-7 man coverages, try to contain Josh Allen, and basically say you either got to run the ball or take the 3 or 4 little dinks and dunks maybe and be patient. So we'll see if Buffalo can do that the whole game. I think they'll still make plays, move the ball. Like I said, ultimately win this game. Josh Allen's just on track for an MVP season, and we know he's a huge difference maker. And then on the flip side too, I think at some point Buffalo is going to have to load the box, just invest in stopping Derrick Henry. And unlike in previous years where they had A.J. Brown and such to scare them over the top, as much as I like Treylon Burks, and I think Robert Woods is very good too. Robert Woods still looks like he's still not 100% coming back off that ACL injury, and he is in his 30s. And then Treylon Burks still looking like he's still getting incorporated in this offense. And obviously he is an A.J. Brown, so I don't think he'll be scaring them deep as much like A.J. Brown. And, he doesn't also have the same connection that Tannehill and Brown did too. Tannehill, a lot of times, Brown was a security blanket. I just don't think he really has that right now in terms of his receiving options. So I think Tennessee keeps it close. I think their secondary bounces back. But ultimately, I think Buffalo wins this one. 10.5 is just too rich for me for a Tennessee team that I think is very well coached and executes. And obviously, he's had success against Buffalo in previous situations and games. Another disagreement there. Now you move to the last game of the week. That is the Philadelphia Eagles at Philly, favored by 2.5, hosting the Minnesota Vikings. Two kind of hot button teams right now. Both had explosive offenses in week 1. So, John, who do you have for this one?
I am going with the Minnesota Vikings. I'm a bit surprised that they're actually not the favorite. I don't know. Philly, they had a really great offensive performance last week, but as we talked about, it was against the Lions, who had the lowest graded secondary of any team in the NFL last week. I think Minnesota is going to be a step up from that, especially just considering that Harrison Smith is back there with the leadership that he provides. Also, I don't have faith in Philly's ability to stop Justin Jefferson. If Green Bay's corners, which Jair Alexander and Eric Stokes and Rasul Douglas, all those guys couldn't do it, I just don't think that Philly's corners with James Bradbury and Darius Slay are going to be able to. And I think that Darius Slay is a very good corner, but I think that Jair Alexander's better. And maybe Philly will actually allow Darius Slay to follow Justin Jefferson, because we have seen Darius Slay do that in the past. Jair voiced his concerns about wanting it, but I don't know. Then if that happens, then I think that Adam Thielen can have an advantage. I think that Dalvin Cook in the run game can have some success. So, I just have concerns about Philly because, honestly, I just wasn't really impressed with their defense last week. They could prove me wrong. Like I said, it was one game, but I just think that Minnesota has a far more talented offense and a more explosive offense than Detroit. And still, Detroit with DeAndre Swift, with Amon St. Brown, all those guys were able to get a lot of explosive plays. So I'm going to go with the Vikings. I went with them last week. They didn't prove me wrong. I'm going to stick with them.
Yeah, this is a tough game to pick. Starting with Philly's offense, I think they're going to definitely have more success than the Packers did against the Vikings defense, and the fact that I think a better offensive line, because the Za'Darius and Danielle Hunter were forces last week, and I think Philly's obviously better equipped to handle them, and just a little more diverse run game with the addition of Jalen Hurts and their stable of backs. And then two, there's a little better, as we saw last week, Philly is at explosive plays. Once they start sucking you in with the run game, as much as I question Jalen Hurts' throwing consistency and just ability to be a consistent passer, he does pretty much for the most part hit his deep passes. We saw that last week. He obviously has a connection with A.J. Brown. I expect them to get Devonta Smith a little bit more involved, and he'll probably have opportunities as well. If there is a part to attack of Minnesota's team or defense, it's probably going to be that secondary. It is a very young secondary outside of Harrison Smith, but we know he's starting to get older. So once again, I just feel like there are opportunities to be had and chances to be taken there. While on the flip side, I am scared about the Phillies defense. They were far too simplistic at times last week, and the Lions were able to move the ball on them. And we all saw what the Vikings did, like you mentioned last week, and made the Packers pay for not doubling or just giving general attention to Justin Jefferson. I'm hoping Philly can adjust to that. Either way, I think at some point they can neutralize the Vikings run game, and hopefully they can invest enough in the pass game they can neutralize the run game with their front four. We know they have, still have Fletcher Cox, Javon Hargrave, and Jordan Davis, those big boys up there. They did lose Derek Barnett last week, for probably he's on IR, but they still have, Hassan Reddick and Brandon Graham. They still have solid edge guys to contribute. And obviously we know they have Darius Slay and Bradbury. Hopefully they can give them some man-to-man opportunities and not play 10 yards off of them like Green Bay did, and just give them free releases, make it a little more difficult. And I assume that they will. So once again, 2.5. I feel like you're really picking who's winning, or I feel like I do. I'm just going to go with Philly, especially at home with the big win that they had last week. And this is a team that's starting to believe, starting to become the flower that Nick Sirianni believed in. I think that, that momentum's a real thing for them. Not that obviously the Vikings have momentum from last week. I'm kind of going with more of the home field advantage here. So, going with Philadelphia. So yet another disagreement for John and myself. So to count it all up, that is 8. And yes, I counted correctly. Nope, I did not count correctly. There's 9 disagreements. Miss Baltimore, Miami. So there's an odd, technically there's an even number after the Thursday night game. So we very well could be with the same record again come next week, but I guess we'll have to find out. It can't happen. It just can't. With technically 10 differences, it can't. But I've been wrong many times before, as we all know. Otherwise, is that about all? Anything else you wanted to add today, or can we?
It's going to be it.
Alrighty. Well, if you were watching on YouTube, obviously, please like, comment, subscribe. If you haven't checked out our YouTube, please do so. We're on the road to 1,000 subscribers. And our YouTube channel is Shut Up and Ball. Same thing as our Facebook page. And then also our main source of social media is Instagram. That is at Shut Up and Ball Pod there. John's putting out daily posts, doing amazing stuff there. So like, comment, subscribe there. We're close to 3,000 followers there as well. And we also have a Twitter and TikTok at Shut Up and Ball there. And then obviously this is a podcast. So we're on all major podcast streaming platforms. So if you like, comment, rate, whatever it does on your platform, lets you do. Otherwise, enjoy your week 2 of games. Hopefully your fantasy teams win. Hopefully you don't lose by 0.02 like Mr. John himself, unfortunately, or be like me and just have a terrible week in one of my leagues where everyone just, blank the bed. Or hopefully, obviously, the team you're rooting for, IRL, wins, unless they are the Bears, because I'm a Packers fan. So, anyways, see you next week, everybody. Enjoy your weekend.